For those of you who have not read this series, ElfQuest is a fantastic, long-running, highly underrated fantasy comic that was, and is, in my opinion, ahead of its time. And I've been a huge fan for 14 years. That being said, while I try to keep the details to a minimum, this video will be chock full of spoilers for the general story arc. But I'm also hyper-compressing 40 years of lore into a 13-minute video. If you want to read these comics and then listen to my take, I've made a short list of relevant issues which can be accessed online for free. Except for comics that have been published past 2014, generously provided by Warp Graphics in the link below. To sum up without spoilers, ElfQuest is a message about the dangers of assumed superiority, over-reliance on societal privileges, and the repercussions of a colonialist ideology, even in the most well-intended of people. So, without further ado... Ah yes, elves. Beautiful, ethereal, magical, reminiscence of better times. They're colonizers. What? They're colonizers! How? Their mom said it herself! Here, look! Timane, the oldest living elf, has a monologue at the end of the original quest storyline. She shares with her wayward descendants how they went through the many phases real-life humanity has gone through, and after millennia of space exploration, decided to ease their dying homeworld into its final days, and in doing so, discovered magic. However, at the very least, for this vessel of ancestral elves, they forgot the lessons that history had taught them. Fundamentally, that making life depend upon them for survival, and being out of touch with the joys and cruelties of living, creates apathy and corruption. Now, the elves are actually the protagonist of this story, but they aren't exactly moral paragons, and for good reason. And this may be just a coincidence, but the alien invader space elves, or high ones, quote-unquote, appear European, or at least white, to the humans that they meet. They have this exploration mentality of, oh, look at this new life form, how quaint! We must indulge in their culture. We must inform our fellow superior minds of our research. If only we could find kindred as intelligent as we are. And proceed to enslave the animals that evolved into people aboard their ship. People who betray them and strand them on the next habitable planet at the first given opportunity. And quite frankly, I don't blame them. After freaking out the locals and several elves getting bonked to death as a result, they find that their magic doesn't work nearly as well far away from what's left of the space rock that taught them magic in the first place. This can be chalked up to two things. They became even more reliant on their magic than we humans are today on our machines, and two, their reliance had made them forget what it means to live instead of just exist. Call it karma. A fall from grace for their abuse of power. A fall from grace for their abuse of power. Their attempts to do magic create a stagnant cesspool of evil glitter that becomes an even deadlier metaphor for their actions later. The most important first-comer elves have two reactions to attempting to survive on the planet. Haken, ancestor to the main antagonist and one of my favorite anti-heroes ever written, tries to frighten and bully the humans into servitude. It unsurprisingly doesn't go well, and not just because Timane stops him. It not only doesn't last, but it makes the descendants of the humans in the proximity even more fearful of elves than before, altering humanity's development in its infancy. The other, Wolf Mom Timane, adapts, learning to become and embody the creatures of the world, particularly wolves, and is the first of the elves to rediscover what living really means. Let's just call it the way. And gifts her descendants with mortality in order to teach her kindred that lesson. Unfortunately, Timane was so fascinated with this new concept of being alive, she dips out on the rest of the elves and spends the next several thousand years as a wolf, leaving her kindred to instill a less extreme form of Haken's superiority complex in the generations to come. Hey, remember that cesspool of stale magic they left behind? 9 generations later, say hello to Bearclaw. This boomer humor, preteen slapping drunkard of a glorious bastard is about to make things so much worse. At this point, elves have been having occasionally deadly prank wars with the humans whenever they show up. And humans have been freaking out and killing them, and it's all like, how could they do this to us? They're so stupid and set in their ways. Every single time. I'd say maybe they'd stop killing you if you stop scaring and deceiving them because you kind of assume that they're stupid, but the damage has already been done by your grandparents. Then again, we all have to deal with the mistakes of our ancestors, don't we? Bearclaw is the one who takes this cycle of vengeance and death to the next level. Pranking them, stealing their food, making fun of their spiritual beliefs and language until they kill one elf teenager. That being said, it's still insanely tragic. Any loss of life is wrong. Crescent frickin' deserved better. Hashtag justice for Crescent. Wait, no, not like that, Bearclaw. No, put that human head down. Oh, pucker nuts. This quickly transformed into this horrendous eye-for-an-eye sacrifice fest, which culminates into a fight between Bearclaw and the human tribe leader that causes that evil glitter to create a half-cat, half-snake monster that slaughters even more of Bearclaw's already dwindling tribe. In total, killing about half the people on the beloved dead poster, himself included. Oh man, I guess humans just can't take a joke. That's where Bearclaw's son Cutter comes in. He's the protagonist, the hero. Cue the fanfare, everyone. No, but seriously, he is the good guy. Ultimately, he is a peacemaker and changes elves for the better. But boy, he makes some mistakes in the beginning, among which, in chronological order, are breaking into the troll caverns. Can't blame him on that bit, though. His tribe's house was on fire. But then, his tribe steals their food, he breaks off a piece of a treasured artifact of theirs, and then threatens their leader, all of which leads them to getting marooned in the desert. Big surprise. When he meets the humans that don't actively want to kill him, he and his boyfriend Skywise pretend to be gods, until they are forced to reveal their mortality to a guy that saved their lives, continuing to work the God Angle Road to El Dorado style until the Siege at Blue Mountain arc. Here's the big one. Now I am gonna preface this with a few things. Guttlecraw's trolls did attack first. Trolls and elves were manipulated into war by a crazy person. Cutter had no clue the trolls were enslaved by his ancestors. And Guttlecraw was a terrifying dictator that literally wore a crown of fingers. However, the elves practically did what America has been doing to countries that have things they want but aren't allowed to have for the past 50 years. They violently infiltrated their enemy's home, destabilized them before going into all-out war, then recruited a new despot who is more friendly to their desires to replace the old one. All hail King Picknose! After they do get the Palace of the High Ones, they don't continue extorting Picknose. And it's ultimately a good thing the elves got the palace because they wouldn't understand the moral complexities of their existence otherwise. On another elves are better at reparations than humans note, when Tamaine retakes her elf form, she holds no resentment toward the troll descendants. And later on in the final quest, Cutter seeks out the last surviving first-generation troll, apologizes, and discusses making reparations for the horrible slavery. And that's more I can say for most human governments. I mean, the bar is insanely low, but still. After Cutter reassembles the splintered tribes of elfkind and largely stops all that guerrilla warfare now that he's got his prejudices and superiority complex ironed out of him, doing so by learning to expand what he considers the way, to adjust to the variety of new cultures around him, and a dollop of trauma that further shows him how delicate things like life and the passing of time are. He commits himself and the tribes under his influence to undo the damage he, his ancestors, and his fellow living elves have done, starting by exposing the elves' mortality and similarities to the human tribe of Hungate Show, and taking out the most Nazi-like elf for a few thousand years, Winnowill. They also start taking in orphaned humans on occasion, each treated with more respect and understanding than the last, from Little Patch to Cutter's human daughter, Shuna. Everyone say thank you, Tylee. What makes the villains in ElfQuest is that, fundamentally, they still have or are still controlled by those who have the same colonizer superiority complex that their ancestors had. Winnowill even goes so far as to treat other elves as lesser for being connected to the earth by their mortality. By extension, she and her crazy, abused son Two-Edge's actions are what lead to the human empire of the Juns, who exhibit the same conquering, colonizing attitude Winnowill has, which hurts both humans and elves. made infinitely worse by literally giving them a shiny new toy called guns. Gee, I wonder who else destabilized communities by giving them weapons. On the flip side, Cutter and those who follow him are doing their best to counter these disservices to humankind, but of course, it's not enough. What is done cannot be undone. They do their best to communicate with and protect the human tribes that are in the harm's way of the warlord they inadvertently helped create. The elves, merely by existing, have changed humans and the world they live in permanently. Sometimes for the better, but more often, sadly, for the worse. This is what I think Cutter's last arc, the final quest, is all about. Each elf must decide whether they want to remain on the planet of abode, or go back to space travel in the palace. Leaving represents the idea of ceasing interaction with the diversity of human, troll, and elf life on abode forever. And hopefully having learned the way, and instead of merely existing as their foreparents had, they will make better decisions than their ancestors had, as they explore the universe. However, they still run the risk of repeating those same mistakes. Staying, whether it's a selfish desire not to disrupt one's personal life, or a more noble devotion to the way, represents living, and, inevitably, dying, hoping to keep the effects they have on humanity to a minimum, and what they do have to be positive, yet still running the risk of further shaping humanity against their knowledge, and sometimes will. This comes down to what I believe is the ultimate message of ElfQuest. The elves are a stand-in for the many and diverse descendants of conquerors, flawed philosophers, misguided scholars, and slave owners. In our real world, that is primarily consisted of white people from Europe and North America. Whether we try to learn from and make amends for our bloody history, or covet our blood-stained rewards from past conquests, makes a cutter kinseeker, or a winnow-will out of us. Shade and sweet water.